When's the last time you remember both leading parties in a Canadian election coming out with day one promises that sounded so similar?
Today, I'm proposing a middle-class tax cut to help all working Canadians get ahead.
Today, I'm announcing that Canada First Conservatives will cut income taxes by 15% for the average worker.
But there's a difference between these two proposals. We're going to explain what that is, how they compare to each other, and we'll try to answer what the cost might be. Okay, so both plans are trying to cut income taxes, and both in a way that affects the widest swath of Canadians possible. The Liberals are promising a 1 percentage point cut on the lowest tax bracket, while the Conservatives are promising a 2.25 percentage point cut. Same bracket. Here's what that means in practice. Canada's tax structure looks like this. 5 federal tax brackets, and the lowest one is on income up to $57,375. That's the bracket the Liberals and Conservatives are targeting. Right now, whatever you make, your tax rate on that 57 grand is 15%. Under Carney's plan, you'd pay 14%, and under Poilievre's plan, you'd pay 12.75%. So let's do the math. Let's say your taxable income is exactly $57,375. We have to remember that you'd be entitled to a kind of tax exemption credit on the first $16,129 of that income. So if we remove that from your lowest bracket taxable income, then we're looking at, and I'll just do the math real quick here, 57,375 minus 16,129 equals, so we're left with $41,246. That effectively gets taxed federally at 15%. And remember, you probably still have to pay provincial tax too, but we're really just looking at the federal portion, okay? So 15% of $41,246. Right now, you're paying, we'll figure that out here. Okay, so that equals $61.86 that you're paying in federal income taxes. That's at 15%. Under Carney's plan, so if we shift this to 14%, and I'm just going to rekey this in, times 0.14, we get 5774.44. So that's a slightly smaller tax bill, which is a savings of about $400 a year. Under Poilievre's plan, which is 12.75%, we'll do the math one more time, 0.1275, then you're left with a smaller tax bill of $52.58.87, or a savings of about $900 a year. And I'm happy to report those numbers are, respectively, both pretty much in line with what the two-party leaders are promising.
For a middle-class tax cut that will benefit a 2-income family by up to $825 a year.
Pour une couple de travailleurs moyens, ça va être presque $2,000 dans leur poche.
Now, here's the interesting thing. What if you make much more than 57 grand a year? What if you make triple that, $150,000? Well, if we look at all of the tax brackets once again, this doesn't really matter because the change is only happening on this tranche of your income. What happens above, again, doesn't matter. So as long as you've maxed out that bracket, whether you're just getting by or whether you're a billionaire, you end up saving that same $400 according to the Liberal plan or $900 according to the Conservative plan, depending on who becomes Prime Minister. And the flip side to this is that if you're among the lowest income Canadians, so let's say you only make $20,000 a year, this tax cut technically saves you less because you're saving a percentage on a smaller amount of money. You may only be saving a fraction of what the party leaders are promising, more like $38 on the Liberal plan or $86 on the Conservative plan per year.
That is not a way to actually help in this difficult time. That's not going to help out folks out there that are saying, you know what, I'm struggling to get by.
If you're not paying taxes or you're not fully earning the 50-odd thousand to fully utilize the lowest tax rate, yes, you would be getting less of a break. But that's true of anything in the Income Tax Act, because the more you earn, the higher your tax rate, not just the more you pay, but you pay tax at a higher rate.
Now, let's be clear about one thing. A person who makes 60 grand a year saving $900, that $900 probably means a lot more to them than a billionaire saving $900, because it's a bigger chunk of their overall income. But we should also talk about the cost of these two plans. The Conservative tax cut proposal saves Canadians twice as much, but would also cost twice as much. The Conservative Party estimates its plan would cost $14 billion a year once fully implemented. The Liberals haven't yet released a comparable figure. But according to this online calculator put out by the Parliamentary Budget Office, if you reduce the tax on Canada's lowest bracket to 14%, it would cost the government an estimated $5.9 billion a year.
That is against the background of a country that's currently running a deficit of $40 billion, has an overall debt of $1.3 trillion, is paying, public debt charges, which is interest charges, of over $50 million. It needs to increase its military spending to 2%, which is going to add another $40 billion to that. And then it's got an aging population, which will mean more healthcare dollars for the provinces. So the math doesn't add up.
One of the parties says we will cut the expenses. Okay, is it the right time to cut the expenses when the moment is more appropriate to support enterprise companies and jobs? And the other party says we will cut expenses and we will cut taxes. There's no way on earth one can manage that.
I have no idea what the politicians propose to do about funding these tax cuts. Where will they reduce the spending? How will they reduce the spending? And if they're not reducing spending, then what do they plan to do with the deficit?
But here's the thing. That kind of difficult math may matter less during an election than a very different kind of calculation.
When you look at the polls right now, deficits and debt is not a big issue. It is far down the list. Affordability is still the biggest one, followed by the Trump tariffs. And so I think right now, I think the idea of getting tax relief is important.
One of Mark Carney's great challenges this election will be distancing himself from the Trudeau Liberal brand. Cutting income taxes, cutting the carbon tax, cutting the capital gains. These are things that move the party ever so slightly away from unpopular Liberal positions and towards the most popular Conservative positions. That's on purpose.
Carney is pitching a lot of his campaign to the center, to progressive Conservatives, to centrist voters who may have felt orphaned over the past number of years by the parties really being on the other sides of the political spectrum and no one really meeting them in the middle.
For now, neither party has released a detailed, fully costed plan on any of this. Both say that'll come eventually.